Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday of the month, except for the first Sunday I do a Subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos of things in their yard that they're proud of. If you're interested in sending in photos for that, the email address is right here. Next Sunday will be the Subscriber Sunday video. That's the first Sunday of June. So there you go. Make sure you include subscriber photos or something in the email so that I can identify them. I get a ton of emails to that address and I don't want to lose your photos. I think that's it. This week I think I'm gonna have a really awesome tour video from a place I visited the end of the week. The person who did the breeding on these red buds, like this Golden Falls red bud here behind me, and some butterfly bushes and other things he's introduced. That one should be a super interesting tour. I got a video on a dwarf cryptomeria that I hadn't covered before, and I don't know what else. The Wednesday update video should be pretty good, and then I'll be skipping Wednesday update videos probably for a couple weeks because I'll be on the road for a little while. Hopefully find some interesting things out on the road to show you as well. So let's get started on the questions from last week. If you have gardening questions, you can ask them down below this video. Keep in mind, it'll be 2 weeks before I have another question and answer video. When I'm selecting questions from the questions I get, some part of it is whether I've answered it before or answered it multiple times. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll link my playlist up here for the question and answers. Every one of these question and answer videos I've ever done on this channel are in a playlist. And like I say, it's linked up here if you want to go back. Your question may have been answered once or multiple times. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked me about staking trees. They'd gotten a lot of rain and they had some thin, wispy trees that they had purchased and now they're leaning over. You're almost certainly gonna need to stake them. And if they're really super thin, you can use some sort of bamboo stake, something like that. But if they're a little more rigid, you can use it like a 3-post stake, and tie off to the tree. Amazon probably has ones available that are reasonable. Just make sure you don't tie anything around the tree that can girdle it as the wind moves it around. But yeah, you do need to stake them back up, and you need to do it as quick as possible. They'll train themselves over one direction if you don't get it done pretty quickly. Somebody said they bought a Rising Sun red bud and then had read that maybe you shouldn't mix any soil amendments in, and then some people said you should. I go with a real basic setup. I either use compost. I either use a small amount of compost, a small amount of pine bark soil conditioner if I can find it, or I use nothing at all. And that's my 3 things that I use. I don't use anything in any kind of planting mix or any of the other expensive things that are in front of these stores. Really a basic set of things that I'll use, and nothing at all is better than something that could hurt the plant in some way. But I've got compost down here on the ground, so it gets mixed in with whatever goes in the ground. You're not gonna hurt anything with compost typically. So, but that's up to you. Super basic stuff to mix into the ground with your plants, and inexpensive. Okay, somebody asked me if I've got this turf that I'm standing in, which I'm wearing out the spot I'm standing in, it was rye and fescue in the fall. The rye has pretty much died at this point. We've had enough hot days, so what's left here is fescue. Somebody wanted to know if I'd convert it to warm season grass. I think I am going to end up with a little piece of turf in the front, and I showed that in the drone video day before yesterday, or I don't remember, day before yesterday, or yeah, maybe it was yesterday. I showed the little piece of grass I'm going to keep. That would be warm season grass. It's very, very hot out there. And so, from where I'm at, I'm in zone 7B. From 7B down to zone 10, warm season grasses would be preferred if you get enough sun. Sun is also an issue because all the warm season grasses need sun. I tend to lean towards centipede. It's not as nice as Bermuda grass can be, or zoysia grass can be, or maybe even St. Aug can be. If you have a nice stand of St. Aug, I don't think the grass is ever going to be quite as nice, but it requires basically no fertilizer. And so I'm very, very drawn to its drought tolerance and its lack of needing me, and does a good job of choking out weeds and being thick enough to do all the things that the other ones do. But I'm super drawn to not having to dump nitrogen on it constantly. Okay, so let's see. Somebody had a oak leaf hydrangea and some robins had a fight in it and took the leaves off of it and wanted to know if they should fertilize it. The only reason you're not going to need to re-fertilize it, that hydrangea is going to leaf right back out in all likelihood. The only reason you would need to fertilize it is if you haven't fertilized it. We're getting toward June now. If you haven't fertilized your shrubs and trees, you still have time this year. This is about the end of the time I'd be doing it though. If you had fertilized it earlier in the season, no, just leave it be. It'll be fine. Don't double up on the fertilizer. That could actually cause additional stress from the plant not having, already going through a stress. Okay, somebody asked me about how do I get rid of thrips, and thrips and aphids for me get the water hose. I like to control them. I say this a lot. I don't keep things that have constant problems on them. Sometimes I'll just rip those things out, or I assume they're planted in the wrong place. They have some sort of stress on them that's allowing them to be easily. Crape myrtles are an example of that. Most of the aphid problems that we see on crape myrtles are in too much shade, they're too crowded, the branching needs to be thinned on them so that they can get some air movement through them. I don't see aphids really on crape myrtles out in big open space where the wind can get across them and that kind of thing. So a lot of times it can be placement, and so maybe I'll move the plant. But if I do have aphids on something, or thrips, early morning with a water hose, you can blast some percentage of them off of the plants. I just do it super early in the morning so other things, you're not blasting other things that will show up later in the day off of them as well. But that's how I handle them. Let's see, and I just reducing the numbers. Okay, somebody asked me about, they bought a house and it's got some vinca or periwinkle growing on a slope. I wanted to know about getting rid of it. I would definitely get rid of it. I am not a fan, and I can look around this yard and I've put in a few hundred varieties at this point, probably a couple hundred varieties, maybe that's an exaggeration, but not far from it with the front as well. I haven't put anything in here that would creep across the ground yet, and I won't. I don't like things that I'm going to have to be, that I can see in the future is going to be constant maintenance. And a lot of times, when the yards in this neighborhood that have the invasive plants that have just taken over the yard, I think people moved into the house when they were in their 30s, and they planted these ground cover things, and through their 30s and 40s and 50s probably didn't have a hard time maintaining them, and then they were 60, and then you do have a hard time maintaining them. So there is some thought, behind that, is can I maintain this in 20 years if I'm still in this house? And probably not with that vinca. So I'm tearing the vinca out for sure. You probably have to use a pickaxe and just go right under it or pickmatic. A pickmatic will take it out, especially a good sharp pickmatic. You can make quick work of it, of getting rid of it. But yes, I would get rid of it. Somebody asked me about a teddy bear magnolia. They had planted it too deep and then raised it up, and then maybe underwatered it at that point, and now it's gone through a lot of stress, and so it's browned, and a lot of the leaves have thinned. It is flowering, but it's super thin. Wanted to know if it would recover. I can tell you that southern magnolias recover super, super slow, and so yes, it will recover. But even in a container plants in a nursery, I had a winter one year. I had some beautiful 15-gallon little gem magnolias going into winter. I protected the containers, but it just got too cold. They took some damage. It was maybe 2 years later in a nursery setting, babying those things before they even look sellable again. In the ground, maybe even longer. So just keep that in mind. Yes, it will recover. It will frustrate you for a long time. So you can make that decision about whether to replace it or not based on your patience. Okay. Somebody asked me if they could underplant azaleas with phlox or some other ground covers. Just make sure that they're compatible for sunlight. Azaleas ground cover phlox needs sun all day long, and so if the azaleas may be blocking that, then that could be that could be an issue. I'm also leave some space. Don't overcrowd them so much that you find hiding. You end up with hiding places for insect problems, and we can create disease problems that way, having things too crowded. But yes, azaleas aren't so piggy that they won't allow things to grow near them. Let's call it that. Okay, so let's see. Somebody asked me about planting over a water line, and it's just not something I've ever really thought about all that much, although I probably wouldn't plant. I had a cherry tree at the old house, super aggressive rooting. I probably wouldn't plant a river birch, or, you know, there's some trees that I might avoid. Shrubs and ground covers and smaller growing things, I probably wouldn't even think about. A water line that's 2 feet deep in the ground, they're just not gonna mess with it. And if they have to replace the water line, they're likely not gonna be repairing it anyway. They're probably gonna run a new line from the meter to your house anyway. But yes, I might be concerned with trees. You know, having some experience, you know, with 25 years in the other house, you know, watching what trees can do over the course of that amount of time, especially the way I'm growing them, because I'm composting everything and I'm improving the soil everywhere. So these trees are able just to run all over the place. If you might be some advantage to planting them in the lawn, like I criticize all the time, because that at least does contain them a little bit. Trees, avoid trees over it if you're concerned about it at all, but I'm not worried about shrubs and perennials and annual flowers and that kind of thing. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked me about narrow screening plants for zone 6. And you can, Blue Point junipers, DeGroots arborvitae, those are 2 narrow growing conifers that come to mind, you know, pretty quickly. There's that blue holly, that castle wall holly. I have no experience with it, but I understand it's a super narrow blue holly. Castle wall, I think, is the name of that plant. I don't know if it's how available it is in northern areas, just because I don't do business with nurseries up there. But those 3 would be a good suggestion. Keep in mind, we always think about when we're screening, like if I was going to screen my neighbor over here, you know, for this fence, we always think, oh, I'm just going to line up a fence of one thing. You know, you can go in and mix some things. You can also stand back and say, what is the most important thing that I screen here? So I don't end up in a prison. I really just want to block the view of the patio over here. And so I'm going to put 2 or 3 strategic pieces here, but I'm going to leave this space a little more open. So like I say, I don't end up feeling like I'm in a prison, and I don't really need to block the back of their property anyway. So keep that in mind. The other thing is, you don't always have to use something that's tall and skinny. You could, in those key places, build some sort of narrow arbor and then grow a vine on it of some kind. You could grow grapes, you could grow roses, you could grow any kind of climbing vine that would, you know, that would take care of the upper part of it, maybe a climbing hydrangea, and then plant lower shrubs underneath it. So keep in mind, I think we just think of one thing when we're thinking of a barrier, which is just like a line of soldiers along a property line. There's some other ways to think about it, and I really do try to just block the key places rather than putting myself in a prison to block them. So somebody asked me about growing a Japanese maple in a container in zone 8. I've got one back here and I'm in zone 7B. The main thing is that container doesn't like to be in direct sun. The roots will definitely get too hot in the south. And so this container goes in the shade by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and so the roots aren't cooking on it. Top of the tree is fine with a little more sunlight, but in the container, they were asking about watering. You are just gonna have to check it. I can see the soil mix I have in there is a dark color when it's moist, and it's a lighter gray when it's dry. Just pay attention to that. I can see it from here that the top of it's starting to get slightly dry, but it rained a couple days ago, so I think it'll be fine for now. If it starts to get where you have to water it every day, pot it into a larger pot. Otherwise, you'll make a mistake at some point and go out of town, and it'll be problematic. Japanese maples do not use a lot of water in containers. They just don't. Every nursery you ever go to that grows Japanese maples, they have them all segregated away from everything else because they don't have to water them very much. Slow growing equals less water usage. Somebody asked me if agapanthus would need staking. There's probably some older varieties that got quite tall that might, if they were in probably a little too much shade. These newer varieties of agapanthus, I've got one blooming right here, is super compact, and I don't think you'd need to. I got four different varieties of agapanthus in bloom right now, and they're only new varieties, 18 inches tall. They don't need to be staked. Another question about a rising sun redbud. The top leader died out on it, and it's now a 2-foot tall shrub. Make sure that what you're seeing isn't below the graft. There's a graft, hopefully you can see this, but My Golden Falls redbud, there's a graft right here where the top of the tree is grafted onto a different redbud. Make sure that growth isn't below that knot at the bottom of that. I hope you could just see that. Let me get... Yes, you could. Okay. Make sure that the growth isn't below that graft. If it is, then that's just a different tree altogether. If it's above that graft, you're going to need to pick one of those shrubby pieces that have come from near the base and turn it into the new leader. Cut the old leader off, take one of them and just start, maybe put a piece of bamboo or something in place and stake that one up, and then slowly remove the other ones. Don't remove all the other ones at first because it is giving energy to the plant, but pick the strongest, most vertical one and start to train it as the new leader. If it's below the graft, then the whole tree died. The whole top of the tree died, and it's the other one it was grafted on, and it's probably needs to be replaced. Okay, somebody asked me how many times to fertilize a little lime hydrangea. How many times to fertilize? I've got white wedding hydrangeas, which are pretty much that one gets about the same exact size. I just fertilize once a year with a slow release fertilizer. If you did it back in March or April, leave it be. They don't need any more than that. And sometimes pushing things can create other problems. Let's see. Sometimes somebody asked me about the sunshine ligustrum thinning. And I think Chinese ligustrum, which sunshine is a Chinese ligustrum, it's just a sterile cultivar that has the gold foliage. So it's a non-invasive gold foliage Chinese ligustrum. Still a Chinese ligustrum. All of them lose their leaves in the spring. They're evergreen, but a lot of evergreen shrubs actually just keep their foliage through the winter, and then as new growth starts, all the old leaves drop. So keep in mind, in a very, very cool spring like we've had, that leaf drop could happen without the new growth having started. And so I think that's probably what you're seeing, and I've seen it before many times on Chinese privet. They'll lose their leaves in March, sometimes before the new growth has a chance to start. Sometimes it's in April. I've seen it a lot. Azaleas do the same thing. Azaleas actually lose most of their leaves in the middle spring after the flowers have happened. But you're not seeing it at all because the new growth is covering it up on top. Lots of plants do that. Okay, I think that'll be it for this week. Thank you very much for participating in these question and answer videos. Like I say, if I'm not answering your question, sometimes it's because I've answered it a couple times already and I don't want to be so repetitive, but go to that question and answer playlist. And I don't know how many of these I've done over the years. It's a lot. And I probably have answered your question in there. Thanks very much for watching.